Once again, we like to turn to Matthew chapter 6, looking at the Sermon on the Mount life. Tonight, it is a life, tonight and next several weeks, a life of dedication. We begin with a new section of the Sermon on the Mount, which is covered from verses 19 through verse 34. Let's read the entire thing. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where, that is earth, moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than the meat, and the body than raiment? Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things, eating, drinking, and clothing, do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things, the eating, the drinking, the clothing, shall be added unto you. Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. All through the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is speaking of a way of life. It's a very particular, a very peculiar way of living. He very clearly defines that life. It is basically the Christ life, which is Christianity. It is a life that is lived supremely. It is to be lived wholeheartedly. It is to be lived continually, and for the honor and for the glory of God. It is the heavenly life upon earth, and it is referred to in John 10 in verse 10 as abundant life. And the life of every child of God should be just that, should be abundant. It is a life of enjoying God. It is a life of enjoying God's best, and it is a life that is possible for every child of God. It's one of the best evidences of that a work of grace has taken place in the heart of an individual. It is also a preservative against a worldly, empty, wasted life. It is the most profitable life that you can live. It is the most beneficial. It is the most productive. It is the most fulfilling. It is the most useful. It is the most influential. It is the most meaningful life. It's the most worthwhile life that there is. And each one of us that are saved are called to live this life. And we have everything we need to live this life. It's the life that is most glorifying to the Lord. It's an extraordinary life. There's nothing ordinary about it. It's a very remarkable life, a truly wonderful life. So what Christ is saying here throughout the Sermon on the Mount, and what he's saying here in this particular section, results in a stable and thriving life. So in this portion, Jesus is teaching us how to live life for Him. Most people, and even God's people, are very bad at living life. They're not very good at it. They just don't have the skill to live a good life. And we have, again, everything we need to live this life. And it is a life that can be lived in spite of the times, in spite of circumstances, in spite of our infirmities, in spite of our limitations. So what is being described in this section runs counter to the ways of the world. It runs counter to the principles of the world. It runs counter to the aspirations of the world. It runs counter to the pursuits of the world. It certainly runs counter to the behavior of the world. And it is a very puzzling life to the world. It should not be puzzling to the child of God. So, as in all the Sermon on the Mount, what we read here is God's design. God's design for living. He's telling us this is how you live. This is how you do it. This is the best way. In this portion, he's teaching us, basically it boils down to dedication to the Lord. Identity with the Lord. You cannot live this life, the life that is being spoken of, without dedication to it, without identity with the Lord. Now, the idea of dedication, because people have different definitions, is to be set apart, to something specific. You have set yourself apart to do this certain thing. You set yourself apart from everything else to do this certain thing. It is something that is very definite, and it is to be committed. To be dedicated is to be committed to a specific and definite purpose. Life has to be boiled down to one purpose. And until that happens, you're just scattered all over the place. and you're not going to live the life that is being described. So it has to be boiled down to this one purpose, which is the Lord, and then we set ourselves apart for that purpose. We set ourselves apart for this way, to God, and to this way of life. And what is being presented here is commanded throughout the Word of God. There are different words that are used. You have the word consecrate. We read there in 1 Chronicles 29 verse 5, "Who then is willing to consecrate his service this day unto the Lord?" To consecrate's the same thing. It's to set apart. Who's willing to set apart from everything else to this purpose? To this purpose. There is the word sanctify, which also conveys the meaning of set apart. We read in Joshua chapter 3, Joshua chapter 7, "Sanctify yourselves." That is, set apart yourself for this purpose, for this one specific purpose, the Lord. There's the word yield. There's the word present. There's the word submit. We see those words used in Romans chapter 6. Verse 13, verse 16, verse 19. We're to yield ourselves. We're to submit ourselves. We're to present ourselves. When are we willing to do that? When we set ourselves apart for one purpose. Again, it comes down to one purpose. You yield yourself to this purpose. You present yourself to this purpose. You submit your life to it. And then the other word that's used throughout Scriptures is that word commit. That is, to commit is you bind yourself to a purpose. You have bound yourself to a purpose, which goes along with setting yourself apart. So, without this dedication, people will not live this life that's being described. Without this dedication to a specific purpose, people will tend to make choices based upon circumstances, based upon pressures, and therefore they basically live life randomly without direction. And that pretty much describes the life of almost everyone. And again, it comes down to this dedication to a purpose. And the purpose is God. We all have choices. We have decisions to make in life. And choices and decisions must have a basis in something. They have to have a basis. For most people, the basis is circumstances or themselves, situations. But the basis is the Lord. That's the basis. He's our purpose. He's the one purpose that we have to dedicate ourselves to. So when you live your life randomly without a single purpose, what do? You go from one thing to another. Just jumping from one thing to another. Finding no satisfaction in any of them. And again, that describes the life of almost everyone. So in this portion on the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord teaches some absolute necessities to being devoted, dedicated to living this Christ life, this heavenly life, this abundant life that leads to just enjoying God in this life. So let's look at, first of all, some obstacles and features of this life. There are several contrasts drawn in this portion of the sermon. In verses 19 and 20, you see the word earth in verse 19. In contrast to that, the contrast is introduced by the first word of verse 20, but. In contrast to that is heaven. So you have earth and you have heaven. Then in verse 24, you'll notice there is the word God. Last sentence there. And there is the word mammon. So you have earth and heaven, God and mammon. The words earth and mammon speak of the temporal. Speaks of that which is below. The words heaven and God, of course, speak of the spiritual. Speak of that which is above earth, above mammon. So these words, earth, heaven, God, and mammon, they speak of different realms of living life. Everyone lives life in a realm. And these speak of different realms. So Christ, in speaking of these earth, heaven, God, and mammon, He's not so much stressing that they are in opposition to one another. They are. They are in opposition to one another, but that's really not what He's stressing here overall. He's not stressing that they are antagonistic toward each other. What He's speaking of, what He's stressing, what He is emphasizing is our attitudes, our thought process toward these things. Our thought process toward earth and mammon. Our thought process toward God and heaven. That's what He's addressing. That's what He's emphasizing, I should say, is our attitude toward these things. Because our attitude toward these things determine the life we're going to live. He's giving warning, and He's also giving exhortation concerning our attitude toward earth, heaven, God, and mammon. Earth and heaven must be put in their proper place. They must remain in their proper place. God and mammon must be in their proper place, and they must remain in their proper place. So if we have one purpose, God, spirituality, which is represented by heaven and God, then earth and mammon does not interfere with that. Does not get in the way of that. Because we're dedicated to this one thing, God, or heaven, spiritual things. So these must be kept in proper perspective. So the life that we're called to live in the Sermon on the Mount is a life that is centered. Everyone's life is centered upon something. It is a life that is centered upon the spiritual. And it must always be centered upon the spiritual. Heaven and God are the two words that represent the spiritual. But inclusive in that life, you can't escape it. Inclusive in that life is earth and mammon. Can't get away from it. Our purpose is God in heaven, or spiritual things. But out there is earth. There are earthly things. There is mammon. In other words, the life, physical life upon this earth requires earth. And it requires mammon. Those two things are necessary. And we're told that in verses 25 through verse 34. He's stressing that. There's the spiritual, but it is necessary to have physical life, earth and mammon. But these things have to be kept in their proper place if we are going to live this life. So, the words earth and mammon correspond to one another. And they speak of the temporal matters. The word earth would be a more far-reaching term, speaking in general of that which is passing. Everything of earth is passing. It's perishing. The word mammon would be a more detailed, more specific word in reference to the necessities of life, the physical necessities of life. And that is defined in verse 25 by three words. Eat, drink, put on. Put on's two words. But eat, drink, put on. That defines mammon. That defines earth. Also in verse 28, you have the word raiment. That's a necessity to physical life. And in verse 31, you have the words eat, drink, clothe. All of these are necessities of physical life. They're all necessities. But never are they to be put ahead of the spiritual. Never. Again, we're dedicated to one purpose. God, the spiritual. These other things, these other necessities, we read it there in verse 25 through 34. God will take care of those things. You don't have to worry about those things. You have to be concerned about the spiritual if we're going to live this life that is being described. So again, earth and mammon, we need to stress this, are not evil in and of themselves. What we do with it, where we place it, determines evil, determines sin. When we put earth and mammon ahead of God in heaven, we sin. We fall short. We have failed. We're not going to be able to live that life. We've allowed something to interfere. But again, earth and mammon, the physical necessities of life, are not evil. But it's our attitude that's being emphasized. So in this portion of the Sermon on the Mount, these things are presented, that is, earth and mammon, are presented as possible perils. In and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them. But they are possible perils when you enter into the equation the depravity of man, and you enter into the equation the nature of man. Now these things are possible dangers because of what we are. because of the way our mind works. So we are warned. We are warned against certain attitudes concerning these things. In verse 19, we are warned against inordinate desire of these. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. Verse 24, we are warned against our lives being defined by these things. When he says, no man can serve two masters. Who you serve, that's what you're defined by. No man can serve two masters. And then drop down the end of the verse, you cannot serve God and mammon. They're opposites. You can't serve both at the same time. It's one or the other. So we're warned against what our life is defined by. And we see also we are warned against worry and anxiety concerning earth and mammon. And we see that in verses 25 through verse 34. So the possible perils are, we have a wrong desire for these things. That is, we put a wrong emphasis upon them. We put a wrong value upon them. A possible danger is that we are defined by these things. And a possible danger is that we worry and we become anxious about these things. If you ever notice, most people, it's pretty rare for someone to worry or be anxious about spiritual things. But they will worry themselves to death about the physical. It's a danger, and we're warned against it. So it is these attitudes toward earth and mammon that become the obstacles. Earth and mammon are not the obstacles. It's these attitudes toward earth and mammon that become the obstacles to living the life that we are called to live. So in these words of Christ, earth and mammon are not the real issue, but our attitude toward them is the real issue. That's the issue. So the determining factor of the way we live is upon what do we place the most value. Now anyone can say, well, I place the most value upon spiritual things and God. Anybody can say that. But our life says, loud and clear, where we place the value. What is important. What is truly important. And sadly, it gets right down to it. Most put more value upon the physical than they do the spiritual. And again, this value has to be maintained throughout our life. So there is the necessity, if we're going to live this life, verses 19 through 21, there is the necessity of having proper value. Placing proper value upon the spiritual and the physical. And that's addressed in verses 19 through 21. It is illustrated, verses 19 and 20, by the word treasures. And in verse 21, you have the word treasure. So 3 times. Twice treasures, Once treasure. A treasure is that which is esteemed and cherished. It is what we consider to be the most worth, of the most worth. It is what we consider to be the most useful, the most beneficial, the most important. Where an individual lays up treasures, where their treasure is, manifests very clearly, no matter what they say, it manifests very clearly what they appraise and what they assess to be the most valuable and the most important. So that's what's being addressed in verses 19 through verse 21. So notice, he begins with the negative. He approaches it from the negative first. He says, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. That's a warning. It's also a prohibition. Do not do this, he's saying. I prohibit you to do this. If you're going to live this life that we all have that all the saved have the opportunity to live, do not lay up treasures upon earth. This is absolutely necessary. Well, what if I do? Well, you're not going to live this life that's being presented. Now, two very important words were, one, lay. Lay. To lay something is to put it there. It is to place or set. You do not lay something by accident. You drop something by accident. You do not lay something by accident. That is intent. So lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. So this is deliberate. The deliberate placing more value upon earth than heaven, than upon physical, than spiritual. It's a willful act. And he's saying, do not do this. Do not do this. It is not, we need to understand these words, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. It's not a prohibition against money. It's not a prohibition against material things. Money, just like earth and mammon, in and of itself is not evil. It is the love of money that is evil. It's what you do with it. It's your attitude toward it that becomes evil. Notice in 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10. For the love of money is the root of all evil. It doesn't just say the love of money is evil. No, it's the root. It's what feeds evil. The love of money. You hear people say all that, follow the money. That's very true. That's very true. True. The love of money is the root of all evil. So he's not talking about, he's not saying, I don't want you to have any money. I don't want you to have any material possessions. That's not what he's saying. He's saying you make sure that you don't love those things, that you don't dedicate yourself to those things. It is also not a prohibition against the accumulating more or adding to earthly possessions. We're told very plainly throughout the Old Testament that God is the giver of money. He's the giver of material possessions. Notice in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 19. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth. God gives it. And hath given him power to eat, the ability to eat thereof. He gives the money, and he gives the ability to use it, to enjoy it, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. So, material possessions in themselves, the accumulation of material possessions, is not what's being prohibited here. What is being prohibited is a mindset toward them. Also, this is not a prohibition against financial success. Financial success is not wrong in and of itself. Many good men in the Bible were financially successful. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, Job, and on you could go. These men would be considered as financially successful. That's not what is being prohibited here by Christ in Matthew 6. Riches, financial success, does not equate into one being sinful. Just as poverty does not equate into one being righteous. Having wealth does not make you evil. Being poor does not make you righteous. Again, it's what you do. These are inanimate objects. Money, material things. They cannot be sinful in and of themselves. It's what we do with them. It's not a prohibition against laying up in store for future use. Again, it depends why you do it. Why are you laying up in store? Those are questions you have to ask. Those are questions you have to answer. But the Bible teaches them. Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 8. Well, let's turn there. Proverbs 6. Go to the ant, verse 6, go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. They lay up in store. 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now, if you allow your providing to take precedence over the spiritual, you've misplaced value. But providing is not sinful. laying up in store is not sinful. Again, depending on why you're doing it, what you're doing it for. So, here in Matthew 6, he begins with the negative, and there are many things that he is not prohibiting. But having said that, it is a prohibition against excessive seeking. And someone says, well, what's excessive? Well, if it's more than the spiritual, it's excessive. If it takes precedence over the spiritual, that's excessive. That's excessive. So that's how you define excessive. You have to have this one purpose, the spiritual, God. And if you allow the physical to take precedence over that, that's excessive. You've overstepped the boundary. So it is a prohibition against excessive seeking. Can't be in church because I'm going to work. I get double time today, or whatever. That's excessive because you've placed it ahead of the Lord. You've placed it ahead of the spiritual. Well, it's only going to be this one time. You keep telling yourself that. That's not true. It is a prohibition against the determination to be rich. To be rich. Notice we go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6. And this precedes, this determination to be rich. Again, it's not sinful to be rich, depending on how you got your riches. But this determination to be rich is sinful. And it proceeds from the love of money. Verse 9. But they that will be rich. Two key words, will be. It doesn't mean they that are rich fall into temptation. Though there's some truth to that. But they that will be, they've set their desires upon it. They have invited temptation into their lives. They have opened their lives to a snare and into many foolish and hurtful lusts or desires. One hurtful, foolish desire does not stand alone. There's always others connected to it. And that's what you have here, this love of money, which drown men in destruction and perdition. It is a prohibition against seeking principally after worldly goods to the disregard of the spiritual, which is actually you take more effort for the physical than the spiritual. That's what Christ is talking about. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. We ought to give more effort to spiritual things than to earthly things. What do we put the most effort into? What we consider most valuable. What we consider most necessary. What's most necessary? Physical or spiritual? It's spiritual. You shouldn't even have to think about that. Shouldn't have to give that any thought whatsoever. The spiritual. Well, what if? No matter what the what if is. Spiritual is more important. That doesn't mean that you neglect the physical, but the spiritual is more important. And that's always so. There's never a situation where that's not so. You need to take care of your spiritual health over your physical health. Not that you're to neglect your physical health. You see, by nature, we're extremists. We feel, well, if I put all the emphasis on spiritual, then I'll just ignore the physical. That's extreme. But what has priority is the spiritual. That's what has priority. And that's always so. There's never an exception. So, it's a prohibition against seeking after goods to the disregard of the spiritual, taking more effort, more pains of getting that which is earthly than getting that which is heavenly. Proverbs 23 verses 1 through 4 speaks upon that. Jesus speaks of that. Notice in John 6. John chapter 6. Verse 27. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. What do we put the most effort into? What do we put our effort into? It is also a prohibition against selfishly laying up for ourselves earthly treasure without any intent of honoring the Lord. Proverbs 3, if we turn there, verses 9 and 10. Proverbs 3, verse 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with thy substance. Then he explains, with the first fruits. The first fruits. The word first is not hard to understand. First. First fruits of all thine increase. All your increase. Not just your paycheck. All your increase. The first fruits. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst forth with new wine. So what Jesus is saying here in Matthew 6, verse 19, is also a prohibition against trusting, putting confidence in earthly treasure above spiritual treasure. Overall, and we'll stop here, Matthew 6, verse 19 is a prohibition against covetousness. Overall, that's what it is. An inordinate desire for the earth, for the things of the earth. Again, these things must be kept in their proper place if we are going to live this life that is being presented to us. And if these things are not in their proper place, I don't care how hard you try to serve the Lord and be faithful, it's not going to happen. There has to be this value system. What is my purpose? And then I dedicate myself to that purpose, which is the Lord. Brother Ben, if you'll come and let's